Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I am your host, Rob Port. Later in the show, Senator Kevin Cramer joins us as he does every week to take your questions. Remember, you can submit those questions to rob@sayanythingblog.com anytime you want, night or day, if you email them in. Also, the day of when the senator's going to be on, or Congressman Kelly Armstrong when he's on for his segment, you can put those questions on my social media feeds. You follow me on Facebook, if you follow me on Twitter, or follow the blogs pages. I solicit questions there. You can submit your questions there. Lots of questions this week, by the way, which I'm very proud of. I'm very happy that everybody's getting their questions in. Critical questions, not critical questions. Just it's a lot of fun. I know the senator enjoys interacting with everybody, so that's really working well. Keep the questions coming every week. But before we get there, we got to talk about the University of North Dakota president, Mark Kennedy. I should say outgoing president, or mostly outgoing president. I don't know. There's some confusion. The rumor was going around this week that President Kennedy had accepted a job or was in consideration for a job at a university in Colorado. Today, he sent out an email to the campus, and sounded pretty definitive that he was leaving, but he also acknowledged that Colorado hasn't made a final decision yet. Anyway, I can't imagine, even if by some off chance he doesn't get the job in Colorado, I can't imagine Mark Kennedy is going to stick around the University of North Dakota for much longer, because boy, has his exit been ugly. I've been describing him on the blog as the embattled president from the University of North Dakota, and I think that's absolutely true. He's got a lot of problems, and he's had a lot of controversies for a while, not least of which were a number of stories that I broke back in February, where Kennedy, gave his assistant a big raise, right? She was supposed to be leaving the university and going to work, going to live in Texas. He then, as she was going out the door, gave her a very large, like $20,000 a year raise. And then announced after, and promoted her to chief of staff. I think she was special assistant, then she was promoted to chief of staff. Then he came up with an arrangement where she was still going to move to Texas, but continue to working at University of North Dakota. And she was going to get a $30,000 per year allowance to commute back and forth from her job in Texas. Now, I broke that story. There was a lot of ensuing criticism from a number of sources, and President Kennedy ultimately backed off that decision. And honestly, I think stuff like that is one of the reasons why he was deciding to move on. And, well, I think North Dakota's ready for him to move on as well. But here's the thing. On the way out the door, right, he gives an interview to a Colorado-based media publication. It's called the Daily Camera. And in it, he suggested that the criticism of his employment arrangement with a special assistant, and again, this is, $30,000 a year in travel allowances to travel back and forth from Texas, on top of a massive salary increase that she got. I mean, that's a cushy thing. He said that he felt the criticism was because of racism and sexism. I'm going to quote now from the Daily Camera, and I've got this all linked at sayanythingblog.com if you want to check it out yourself. I quote, Kennedy told the Daily Camera that the world should embrace remote working, but he doesn't think that was at the heart of the criticism. I fear that part of the reason that that article got as much attention as it did is some people couldn't understand how a young African-American woman from the South could be as qualified and worthy to do the job as others, he said. Quote, I'm quite confident it was about more than remote working. First of all, that accusation is more than a little self-serving, right? Because he's essentially casting an aspersion at critics, saying that they weren't motivated by genuine concern over the way a powerful state bureaucrat was spending taxpayer dollars. No, it must be sexism. Now, I can tell you, I was aware that Angelique Foster, who is the employee in question, that she's an African-American woman. I knew this because what first called my attention to her arrangement was a University of North Dakota blog post, which featured a picture of her saying that she was going to continue working at the university. That's where I got the information that she was going to be staying on, and I launched my request for information from there. But many of my readers had no idea what this person looked like. I doubt many of them even knew what her name was. They just knew that there was an employee who had this arrangement, and they didn't like it. Also, President Kennedy suggesting that this is somehow, just about remote working. Listen, if you're spending $30,000 a year to fly back and forth from North Dakota to Texas, that's not remote working, right? Remote working is somebody who lives in a remote place and works from there, not somebody who has to fly from Texas back to North Dakota on a regular basis, and you have to spend $30,000 a year. Remote working makes sense. I work remotely. Lots of people work remotely. There are applications in which it makes sense, but not for everybody. And not somebody who's going to be a chief of staff to the university president, whose job it is to attend meetings, to be a visible presence on campus, to be a leader on campus. By the way, those are all things that I read from the University of North Dakota's job description for chief of staff. The reason why she couldn't just work remotely from Texas, the reason why we had to spend tens of thousands of dollars a year flying her back and forth from Texas is because it's not really a job that you can work remotely at. She was going to have to be on campus on a regular basis. And so they were saying that she was probably going to have to fly back like every other week or every 2 weeks. That's not working remotely. It was a bad decision, and Kennedy should just should accept accountability for it. The fact that he can't illustrates what a poor leader Mark Kennedy was to begin with. And also, can we recognize, so far this week on this podcast, we've talked about State Representative Ruth Buffalo, who I asked for information about her travel arrangements to a left-wing rally in Tennessee. It turns out she wouldn't answer my questions. She went to a left-wing reporter at the High Plains Reader who wasn't going to ask her any tough questions. She went and told him, she got her flight paid for. She got her hotel paid for by a left-wing group involved in North Dakota politics. Now, that article, though, focused on the idea that Representative Buffalo is somehow a victim because she's a Native American and a woman, and now she's being victimized because these evil right-wingers like yours truly were being critical of her and her travel arrangements. Now we have the president of the University of North Dakota who got caught giving his special assistant, who he's had a long-term relationship with, going back to like 2012 when she worked for him at a previous university, right? So this is somebody he's enjoyed working with. He's liked working with for a long time. He gives her a massive raise when everybody thought it was announced by the university she was going to be leaving the university. So just before she leaves, she gets a massive raise. And then when it's decided that she's going to continue working on the university, she gets a $30,000 per year travel allowance to live in Texas on top of that. By the way, it was a $30,000 per year raise at a $25,000 yearly allowance to begin working remotely from Texas. So those were the numbers. I apologize, I got those a little bit wrong. So, but anyway, that's worthy of criticism. But to deflect that criticism, he suggests it's about her race and her gender, and it's not. And by the way, making those sorts of accusations are ridiculous. Now, listen, there's lots of people in the public in North Dakota, and there's lots of people in the public in the United States in general. And I have no trouble at all believing that some of these people are racists. And some of these people might be motivated in their criticism of a woman like Angelique Foster because of her race or because of her gender, or perhaps even because of her age. I don't know. Sometimes people believe a lot of stupid things. Racism, bigotry, ageism, those are some of them. But to even bring that up as though there weren't perfectly valid criticisms of that arrangement is ridiculous and also hurtful for a society that is struggling to get by some of those things, right? We're struggling to figure out how we're going to get along when we have these fractures along racial lines, along gender lines. And then somebody, in a very self-serving way, someone in a manner to deflect criticism from themselves, launches that sort of accusation. Well, it's ridiculous. Now, obviously, at some point here in the future, we're going to be needing to hire a new president for the University of North Dakota, and I have some thoughts on that. I'm thinking about writing my Sunday print column about this as well, but I feel like we need to definitely stop treating these university president jobs like they're as important as we do. There's always this sense, and we go out and we spend like over $100,000, right? We spend big money. We form a committee. It's a search committee, and then we pay consultants, and the whole rigmarole will cost, six figures, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right? Because we've done this for, searches for university chancellors and university presidents. We're doing this all the time. And the goal is always, we got to hire a visionary, right? We got to hire some rock star. And we're always getting a bunch of applicants from out of state. And I got to tell you, maybe we need to lower the bar a little bit. And by that, I mean, maybe we don't need another big ego. Maybe we don't need another visionary or a rock star. Maybe we just need somebody who will come in and quietly, effectively, efficiently do the flipping job. And maybe we have plenty of people like that already in the state of North Dakota. Maybe we have a lot of people like that already working. Maybe at some of our existing universities. Maybe already in our business community. I don't know. But maybe we should focus our search there. People who are already familiar with North Dakota, who already have relationships with leaders here, who are already aware of the society, of the culture, who are already, in the eyes of the public, known quantities. We have all sorts of smart, talented people here. And for some reason, North Dakota has this sort of self-loathing attitude, right? It's like, in order to get something good, we have to go to out of state, right? I mean, it's always, I can remember when I was a kid, my parents would always like make it seem like something we bought in like Minneapolis was better than something we'd bought in Minot or North Dakota in general. And it's just a silly, I think we do it with people too. Like we just assume, well, I mean, if we hire somebody from, far away, I mean, not that Mark Kennedy was from all that far, I mean, he's from Minnesota. But I think there's definitely this feeling, this sort of self-loathing that North Dakotans have, that if we want to hire somebody for a really important position, we got to go out of state. It's like we believe a lot of the mean things people in other parts of the country say about North Dakotans, that, we're rubes and we're backwards or whatever. And so we feel like if we really want to get somebody good, we got to go from out of state. Well, how about we check the self-loathing at the door and hire from within? I think it'd make a lot more sense. I'm going to expand on these thoughts in my Sunday column, so stay tuned for that. My interview with Senator Kevin Cramer up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Senator Kevin Cramer joins me now, as he does every week, to take your questions. Remember, this happens by the time you hear it, we record it on Wednesdays. By the time you hear it, it gets published Thursday morning. So keeping that timeline in mind, you can email your questions in, rob@sayanythingblog.com, really anytime you want. When I get them, I'll save them up, and I will ask them when the senator's on. Of course, I also put up and most people seem to prefer this method, but I also put up the social media feeds on Facebook, on my personal Facebook page, on Say Anything Blog Facebook page, as well as Twitter. So if you're following me there, which, I mean, why wouldn't you want to? You can participate in the questions there. And I always tell people, Kevin, if they just want my political stuff, follow the Say Anything blog feeds. If they also want pictures of my kids and some random baseball commentary, they should follow my personal feeds as well.
Sounds perfect, Rob. That sounds perfect.
It does.
I have three Facebook pages, and that's two more than I can handle.
Yeah. Well, there are days when I think that if I could just opt out of Facebook entirely, I think I would. But kind of for the gigs that you and I have, kind of unavoidable.
That's it.
So
that's it. You got it.
Tell me about the Space Force. I'm reading a press release here you put out earlier this week that you met with President Donald Trump at the White House to discuss building a Space Force. I'm going to quote from your press release here. You said, space is quickly emerging as a new realm of military conflict. In order to maintain American dominance in space, we must assemble a modern and capable Space Force. I look forward to working with President Trump, the Department of Defense, and my Senate colleagues to give space the attention it deserves. Now, I think a lot of people are making fun of this. Oh, Space Force, hardy har har. But I think the points you make there are important. Increasingly, we need to have a presence in space, and we need to be able to defend that presence in space. But also, B, specifically for North Dakota, given our, we have 2 Air Force bases here, we have some other military stuff. There's an opportunity here for some of the Space Force to have a North Dakota component. Am I wrong?
No, you're exactly right on all counts. First of all, just so people understand, Space Force, it's not like a Star Wars or Star Trek or something like that. A Space Force is important in my mind. By the way, I support a Space Force. That might be obvious, but not everybody does yet. We already have Space Command in the Air Force. Every combatant command has some space component to them. And a lot of people see a new Space Force as an add-on or as new spending or new bureaucracy. I think the way the president has proposed it is exactly right. While he started out proposing this whole new, force that would have its own secretary and its own chief, of course, all of those things, a bunch of people. This is more of a consolidation and a reorganization of a lot of the space efforts that already exist. And then, of course, adding the force, and it probably is a total of repurposing 15 to 20,000 troops, whereas the Army, for example, has 500,000 or more troops. It's really designed to organize and emphasize the importance of space. Why is space important? Space is important because that's where China and Russia, frankly, are moving much faster than we're moving. And it has to do more than anything, Rob, with our communications systems, our communication satellites, making sure they're hardened. And that's how every one of our other combatant forces communicate. And, we run a risk of being able to be taken out easily, regardless of how lethal or how prepared and large our other fighting forces are. If we lose our communications in space, we basically lose touch with one another. Yeah. It's really critical. You also have, there's a lot of news recently about the successful testing by China and Russia of hypersonic missiles. Hypersonic missiles can go into space and come back, and they come back very fast, or they originate from space. And we invented the technology, but we've never weaponized it. They are. And so in my mind, and when I've talked to the Marine Commandant, the Secretary of the Air Force, Army, Navy, many admirals, they all say we need to have this. So the reason it's timely is we have a big hearing on the topic tomorrow. Now, I've asked the others, the other combatant commanders, including the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of the Air Force and several generals about it in previous hearings, but tomorrow we'll have one specifically on Space Force. I intend to be a supporter of it. I'm trying to lead the charge on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and that's why it's important. With regard to North Dakota, Space Force, it probably exists most closely with the nuclear pad and our missile systems and missile defense. Obviously, North Dakota has some of each. We have the large Cavalier Air Station radar, which monitors incoming and monitors space junk, if you will, satellites and space traffic. And then we have, of course, the Minot Air Force Base, which is second to none, really, and it's important. So, and even our UAS, our UAS missions are all relevant to space. Yeah. And we have intellectual assets at the University of North Dakota, as well as other places.
It's really, I think the history of the Air Force is, and the way it was incorporated into our armed forces is instructive here, because it's really sort of a new thing. I mean, back when, World War I was really sort of the beginning, and then World War II, of course, it became, a lot more important, moving troops, projecting force. Airplanes were the hot new technology back then in the combat theaters. Really, the Space Force, but we didn't have the Air Force from it wasn't like we invented airplanes, and then all of a sudden we just invented the Air Force. They were part of the Navy, and they were part of the Army. And I think actually to this day, I think the Navy has more airplanes than the Air Force does. But we created a separate contingent, focusing on that specific technology. And so I feel like developing a Space Force, and again, I think it sounds outlandish. If you look back, developing the Air Force was controversial. I mean, there were a lot of people that didn't think we needed a separate Air Force. Now, I think the efficacy of this at this point can be is well established. But back then there was the same sort of fight that we're having now over the Space Force. Really, if you read back 1940s, 1950s, we were having the same fights about the Air Force.
Yeah, no, it's a great illustration. And by the way, the Space Force at this point, the way it's proposed by the White House, is designed to be to the Air Force what the Marine Corps is to the Navy. So it's a separate force, but it won't have its own secretary. It will have its own chief of staff, but not its own secretary. It would be part of the Air Force. Okay. but a separate force within the Air Force
Sure.
with a very specific mission. Now, how it might evolve. And the president and I actually talked about that yesterday. How it might evolve, who knows? It may evolve into its own major force. But that's why I'd like to get authorizing language in the Defense Authorization Act, and then start small and incremental, and see what happens to it with due diligence.
Let's switch gears here. I want to talk a little bit now. I realize this is the House side, and I want to ask Congressman Armstrong about this. But the House subcommittee on the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on House Administration Subcommittee on Elections. I'm literally reading from. This is their actual name that I'm reading from the press release. They're holding a field hearing in North Dakota concerning what they describe. Now, this press release is coming obviously from Democratic leadership of the committee, and if you look at their invited, the witnesses and some of the panel, I mean, this doesn't seem like a very balanced hearing, just at first blush. But anyway, they're coming to look at what they're describing as troubling developments surrounding the franchise and access to the franchise in the Dakotas, and basically over our voter ID laws. Now, obviously, that was a big part of your election. The election cycle that you participated in. I mean, there were a lot of accusations thrown around during. What do you think of this field hearing and them coming out to North Dakota to inquire as to voter ID laws in our state?
Well, if it's a sincere effort to discover the truth, they're going to find out that there was a record turnout on our reservations, and actually for a non-presidential year, near record, if not a record turnout, statewide. So whatever our laws are, they certainly didn't squelch any turnout on reservations, or anywhere else in North Dakota for that matter. North Dakota is a very easy place to vote. I think that's one of the things that North Dakota touts pretty regularly. We have a lot of activism, we have a lot of participation in our election process, and it's very easy to be involved and participate in our election process, including voting itself. And by the way, we had people at the reservations that were poll watchers, just as Democrats did. Is my understanding that there were no episodes whatsoever. There was no strong disagreements. Whenever there was a challenge to somebody's right to vote, there was a concurrence among the legal team on each side. I heard it went without a hitch, and we didn't hear of any problems. So if they're sincere in their effort, they may find a best practice right there in North Dakota.
Well, if they do honestly uncover real problems, I'd like to address those, because I don't want anybody. Sure. I want it to be easy for people who want to vote. I mean, I don't want to deny anybody the vote. So if they do uncover real problems, I'm just a little worried, because I feel like it was used as a talking point during the election more than I think a sincere concern. Also, I should point out, the United States Supreme Court, albeit with a dissent from Justice Ginsburg, allowed our law to be enforced. I mean, it was right. The Supreme Court had a chance to enjoin it. They didn't.
Right.
Now, that's not them saying it's constitutional, but certainly that's them saying, well, it's not so we're not so concerned about the constitutionality that we're going to prohibit it being enforced, prior to it being, fully adjudicated. So, again, I feel like it was vetted, and like you said, I don't know that we really had any problems. We saw record turnout. So what's the issue? I don't know why we're still talking about this.
Well, because it is a talking point, but having said that, again, it's a talking point that, when vetted in the marketplace, didn't turn out that way. So why they keep making it a talking point, it beats me. But that's oftentimes what the left does. They just keep beating the dead horse, and I think in this case, it seems to be what they're doing. I hope they get hospitality when they're there.
Taylor asked a question. Now, I think he was a little concerned about, or it might be a she. I'm sorry, Taylor, if I got your gender wrong. It's hard to tell sometimes from the Facebook. When they got the couple picture, and it's Taylor, I don't know which one is Taylor.
One of
them's Taylor. Anyway, Taylor asks, and they got a question about the International Peace Guard. Now, there's a little bit of controversy before the legislature, where it's like, a state appropriation for like $5 million for the cactus garden up there. So I think he was a little worried about asking this, because we weren't sure what the federal component was for the International Peace Guard, because obviously it's something that we share with Canadians, and it's a symbolic thing of our wonderful relationship with our neighbors to the north. But I think the question he was asking is, the state's doling out money to fix the peace gardens. Is there a federal contingent here? I mean, should the federal government be picking up some of this tab?
Yeah, there really isn't. There's been talk over the years, as I recall, about that possibility, but it's never become a high federal priority. It's always been a North Dakota, Manitoba project, or as they say on the Canadian side, project. It's always been something that the province and the state have done, and it's been, it used to be on our license plate. I don't think it is anymore. The Peace Garden State, maybe it is. I don't remember, but do I think it's a good spending of $5 million? I don't have any idea. I just don't. Obviously it's a state legislative issue. I didn't hear any of the testimony, but I would say this: if the Peace Garden, in my view, is worth investing in. It's worth keeping going. But if you're going to do it, we need to do it well and do it right, so that it attracts the type of visitors that can make it sustainable, in the marketplace. But even without it, it's the symbolism of the Peace Garden, the symbolism of the longest peaceful relationship in the longest peaceful border in the world. It's something that I think as a state we ought to hold up and be proud of. And spending some money on the garden itself, I don't think is necessarily a bad idea. I don't know the context of it. I don't know what how it fits in the priorities, but obviously it's represented by people who care, and I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand.
I think there's also a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say, well, not many people visit the Peace Garden, so let's not put much money into it, well, then that's right. Maybe it's not a nice place to visit, and then even fewer people visit, and then it becomes a death spiral, which is not so great. Yep. Let's keep moving. Right. Jay via Facebook asks, why isn't the wall built yet?
Yeah, well, in my view, the biggest reason the wall isn't built is because the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is in charge, and we in North Dakota have a pretty good we have a pretty good view of how the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers builds things. I mean, they stopped a pipeline that they didn't even have to invest in, that was all built except for a little piece across a river. So I think it's bureaucracy on top of bureaucracy. I think there's a lot of I just think there's no incentive for a bureaucracy to build the wall, and as long as they're in charge of building it, there's a likelihood that it's going to be slow walked. I talked to the president about this just yesterday, and I talked to Jared Kushner about it yesterday as well. Expressed in very specific terms my concern that Congress is appropriating billions of dollars. The emergency declaration has allowed him to get another, at least another billion from the Department of Defense. Billions are big numbers, and we should be able to be building some wall with it rather than just subcontracting and contracting and designing and planning and acquiring some land here and there and fixing up old wall. So I think it's for some reason the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has an awful lot to say about this, and they don't seem to be capable of doing it. So I think my position has been pretty well documented in this town, and I'm going to continue to pound on it until we start seeing some brand new wall going up at a pace that's, and by the way, at a price that's appropriate for the tax dollars that they're taking to do it.
Jake has a question. Do you support or oppose the incoming winter storm? Well, Jake's being
He's being sarcastic, but I will say this. I hope I am concerned about it. I'm especially concerned for the people south of us who seem to be getting the brunt of it in Nebraska and southern South Dakota, and they can afford it more, less than we can in North Dakota.
Yeah. Tammy asks, do you have concerns about drug importation? Now, she says importation. I don't know if she means like illegal drugs coming across the border or like drugs being imported legally. I guess I'm not sure what the nature of her question is, but she says drug importation.
Yeah. I'm going to I don't know for sure either what she might mean, but it sounds to me, I would take that to mean the ensuring the patient's access to medicine, and are we concerned about that access maybe to legal medicine, legal drugs, to imported maybe unapproved medicines, whether they come from Canada or elsewhere in the world, whether that's a concern. There's also been some concern about some of our drug makers that maybe have some of it manufactured in countries far from Canada even. The bottom line is, this really leads to the whole issue of pharmaceuticals and pricing, and it's a major issue in our country. We need to find ways to bring drug prices down, And, the United States is the gold standard when it comes to both regulating the safety of our medicine supply, but also the production of it. So, when importing medicines from countries that, for example, don't have our standards, can, obviously taint our medicine supply if we're not careful. So, the FDA does, some pretty rigorous oversight and enforcement. And without that, of course, you'd increase the potential for counterfeit or, other products that would infiltrate our pharmaceutical supply chain. We really do have to be careful of that. So that's why we have the USDA. That's why the FDA, and that's why it's so important that we remain the gold standard. But at the same time, our innovators are innovating. We have to find that balance of, that allows them to make enough money to be the gold standard and prices be low enough that people can afford to buy the life-saving drugs that we have. But yeah, so the answer in a nutshell, if that's what you're talking about, I do have some concern about importation of unapproved medicines.
Dwayne asks, how do we effectively and efficiently distinguish between the migrant labor force we need and those that are more interested in doing our country harm?
Wow, that's a great question. So a couple of things. One, securing the border. I think that's really important. And then reforming our visa programs so that we know who's entering and who's staying. That's a big part of it, is who's staying, overstaying their visas, for example. But if we do those things, we can bring real economic opportunity while having a safe immigration system. So one thing that I like to talk about is E-Verify. And a lot of employers don't like to talk about E-Verify. And E-Verify is simply using modern technology to track people, keep track of people. By that I don't mean staple a device to them and follow them around. I mean, know when their time is up, so to speak, if it's on a work permit or visa, or whether they have a green card or become citizens, all those things. And that when an employer hires immigration workers, that they can check and verify that they are here legally, and that they can then demonstrate that with basically a push of a button on their cell phone. That kind of thing, monitors illegal activity, particularly on the hiring side of things. So we can do a lot of things that aren't that difficult to do if we just have the will to do it, to make sure that we're getting the right people. Now, I know there's a lot of news out today, and Jared Kushner and I talked a lot about this yesterday, because I am, and I think we've talked about on this show, a original co-sponsor with Mike Lee on this H-1B visa bill, the High Skilled Fairness for High Skilled Workers Act. And I think when we do these kinds of things, we need to have a merit-based system that doesn't necessarily reduce the number of immigrants. It might even increase the number of immigrants, but they're the immigrants that have the skill sets and the experience that we need in our workforce. So I think that's the ticket. The ticket is to have a merit-based, skills-based immigration system rather than this lottery-based or family chain migration system that we have today.
Charles and Nate have pretty much the same question, so I'm just going to read them both back to back. Nate says, for years, the GOP has ran on, among others, the rising national debt. The GOP blames Obama for raising the national debt during his presidency from $10 trillion to $19 trillion. When can we expect the Republicans to start acting on their platform of a balanced budget and reducing the national debt? It has risen still in the first 2 years of Trump's presidency, and there is no end in sight. Republicans have failed to shrink government when they've had control of Washington. I'd like to see them change and actually do what they say. Charles says, I would like both sides of the aisle to sit down and address the staggering national debt. We are at a tipping point, and no one is even talking about it. Is there anything you and others in D.C. can start doing sooner instead of later?
Yeah. So some things that have been done on the spending side, of course, was the sequestration that has led to tremendous reduction in the growth of the discretionary side of the budget, and we've talked about that a lot on this show as well. But with the growing part of the budget being the mandatory side, that's an area that we haven't dealt very well with, and President Trump, has pledged not to deal with, particularly Social Security. And it used to be that more money was coming into Social Security than was going out. Now it's the other way around, to quite a degree, and a growing degree, because of course baby boomers are retiring, and there are fewer younger people that are paying in than there are older people, you're getting the payments, if you will. And so we have to deal with that mandatory side. Now, the one thing I would say, one of the things that sort of I marvel at, Rob, is one of them said that we're at a tipping point. I think a lot of us have felt we've been at a tipping point for a decade or longer. When we're approaching a debt that's close to the actual productivity of the country, the GDP, and there was a while there in the Obama years when we were at about 100% of gross domestic product. I think now we're at about 83% of GDP, and the reason that balancing has taken place is not so much about cutting the government spending as it has been growth in the economy. So the growing economy is one part. When we cut the taxes, passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that bent the debt curve quite a bit more. The debt curve, it was supposed to cost a bunch of money. Well, the debt curve's been bent in favor by having the best return we've had in government revenue here in history just last month. So we're seeing things come around on that side of it. But in order to get to balance, which is what we'll have to do to get to, say, balanced budget, to then get the debt, start to get that debt paid off, that's going to take probably 10, 15 years if we're aggressive. The one text or email or whatever it was, Facebook post was referenced both sides sitting down, and that's clearly what's going to take in a divided government. But I just would say to my conservative friends who are very concerned about the debt, remember, one side wants to cut spending, at least grow it less than the other side, and the other side wants to raise your taxes. And both can contribute to balancing of the budget. We're always going to fight over whether it's a spending problem or a revenue problem.
Steve asks, what about the parallels between the Obama administration illegal wiretaps and nefarious underhandedness, in addition to Hillary Rodham Clinton and the DNC and many others who did the same to then candidate Trump, including but not limited to the GOP leadership who were complicit by their deafening silence? What specifically will you personally author to bring those to justice?
So, first of all, the biggest thing I did was I voted for William Barr to be the Attorney General of the United States. Secondly, just by getting elected, we have, of course, continued to have and actually have a little larger majority as Republicans. And so you have Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who's absolutely committed to hearings on the topics that the writers are talking about and writing about. So these are big opportunities that we have to get to the bottom of a lot of this stuff. But I'm very concerned, Rob, about the behavior of Democrats after the initial 4-page summary of the Mueller report, and all the rest of it's going to come out shortly, and we're going to find out that William Barr didn't demean himself by lying about the findings of the Mueller report, and that Democrats are going to continue to pursue this craziness. But the biggest problem with the Mueller report that I saw that gives me, pause, is that yes, there was wiretapping going on. There's human spies basically in the campaign and sources, and that they created this fake dossier that was the basis, not really, it was the basis of an entire $30 million special counsel investigation that involved 60 FBI agents and lawyers, only to come up with no evidence of collusion, which was the whole point, was to find and prove collusion with Russia and between Russia and the campaign. The fact that the FBI can do that to individual citizens is frightening. And by the way, we also know that they listen in on conversations of reporters, conservative reporters, that the spying agencies did that. So oversight is one of the important roles of the Congress, and I do mine, and the relevant committees of jurisdiction continue to do it. But it's also a very political process. I don't have any specific legislation that I'm introducing for it, because first you have to find out if the laws were broken, and that requires investigation, and the appropriate committees are doing that.
Jan asks, when will you introduce a bill to deal with illegal immigration, anchor babies, and amnesty?
So we had a bill just like that that dealt with a lot of those things. In fact, the president had a bill like that when I was in the House, and we had it ready to go and ready to vote on, and couldn't get enough votes to pass it, if you can imagine. We couldn't get enough Republican votes to pass it because, again, in a divided government, when you need 60 votes in the Senate, especially, you need to give a little to get a little. And one of the problems with all of the things that he writes about, I think all of them need to be dealt with: chain migration. And by the way, just so you know, Jared Kushner is working on all of those issues right now in a comprehensive way to use as potential legislation. And again, he and I had a long talk about it yesterday. But in order to deal with chain migration and eliminate the amnesty, if you will, catch and release, and come up with a more merit-based system, the president was willing, and I think continues to be willing, to deal with the DACA, the Deferred Action for Child Arrivals, and maybe allow dreamers a path to legal status somehow, or maybe citizenship. In his case, I'm less interested in citizenship, but some type of a legal status. But even with that, compromise, Democrats weren't willing to come to the table, and some Republicans balked because there was something in it for the left. And we have to get over that notion of perfect being the enemy of good.
Via Twitter, ask him why, being the only advanced economy in the entire world that doesn't treat healthcare as a universal right, is viewed by him as a plus rather than a tragedy of partisanship.
I guess I don't know if I understand the question.
I think
the United States doesn't have the best healthcare system.
He says we're the only advanced economy in the world that doesn't treat healthcare as a universal right, and he's wondering why you view that as a positive rather than a tragedy of partisanship.
Well, first of all, it is. We do have full coverage. We've had coverage for a long time of people in different ways, but we don't have a one-size-fits-all universal system, which is what the left is advocating for. As you know, the Democrats have offered up this week. Bernie Sanders announced this Medicare for all. 58% of North Dakotans receive their health care from their employer. It's very good health care. It's far superior to what these other countries that the person's writing about get. It's higher quality. It's shorter wait times, better access. And so the idea that somehow we should lower the bar so that everybody can be equal is not America's strength. What I prefer is to do some of what the president's already done through executive action. I think we got to codify it if we can. That is, in fact, I'm joining the bill this week to do exactly that. That is to allow the formation of association health plans. And that's why I had the Secretary of Labor out to North Dakota a few weeks ago, and we did a roundtable on that because that rule falls under his jurisdiction. And we talked to Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, chambers of commerce, other groups, and insurance companies that could help facilitate association health plans that allow small employers or anybody else who wants to associate in whatever way they want to associate to be able to have the critical mass to be able to bring down cost and have access to the same quality health care that people who work for large employers get. In Nebraska, they did exactly that, and they brought the price of premiums down 25%. And so we can do things that still honor our free market system that will ensure that the quality remains at a high level while people still have the type of access that a sophisticated country like the United States should be able to offer all of its citizens.
Rick asks, and this is the last question, ask him if he supports the bill that will make free filing directly with the IRS impossible and is a total gift to the tax preparation industry. He continues, then when he says, blah, 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 we must support businesses, ask him if he understands that he was hired by constituents and not by corporations or the stock market investors. And feel free to remind him that more than half of the households in North Dakota would benefit from free IRS filings, and all he is doing when he votes in support of the bill will be taking money from taxpayers and handing it to TurboTax. That shouldn't be the reason he is in Congress. So I think he's kind of I think this is a House bill at this point. I don't know if this is before the Senate.
I have no idea. But I've never heard of this. So I don't know what he's talking about.
It's kind of broken the news today. I could just describe it for you a little bit. I guess there's an amendment to a House bill that would, and I guess it's got bipartisan support. I mean, it's coming out of the Democratic House. But it would prohibit the IRS from offering like a free TurboTax style like web portal, right? I don't know if you've used, I use TurboTax to do my taxes. So you go through and you enter your information, you answer a bunch of questions, they figure out your deduction. It's really slick. It's nice. And so,
especially now that we've simplified the tax code, it's going to even be easier.
Yeah. Well, so they're saying basically the bill says IRS, you can't do this. Only the private sector can do this. That's my understanding of the bill. Assuming that's accurate, how do you feel about that concept?
Well, I personally, I've always liked the idea. File a very simple form online for free, and either get the refund or pay whatever they owe with an easy form, whether it's through the IRS or somebody else. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know who's offering it. I have not heard any arguments against it. For my children, when I used to do my children's taxes, my adult children's taxes, I always used it. I always used the free direct IRS form, and found it to be convenient and obviously low cost. So, no, tax simplification to me is, should be the goal. That's why doubling the standard deduction was such a big part of our tax bill in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that allowed people to keep more of their own money, and and also cost them less to comply with the tax code. So on the surface, it sounds like something I wouldn't be very supportive of, but I like to hear all the arguments before or at least hear another argument before I'd make that decision. But I don't think the government doing something free. A lot of times, if it can be done, there's sort of I have this sort of yellow pages sort of position. The government shouldn't be competing with the private sector, but collecting taxes is a government function.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that the government ought to facilitate it in as simple and as inexpensive a manner as possible.
Well, there is counter to that. There is an industry that has grown up around how complex the tax code is, right?
Yeah.
TurboTax's business is based on the fact that I don't feel like I'm smart enough to just go get the forms and file my taxes myself. Like I need what I'm paying TurboTax for is to guide me through that. And so if we do what you're saying, which is let's make this process simpler, and then I just go to the IRS website and answer the questions and file my taxes for free. Obviously, you're taking business away from TurboTax, and obviously, I imagine TurboTax or whoever H&R Block, I don't know, like that industry is going to lobby to fight that. That's obviously the battle lines. Which side of that would you come down on?
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I suppose I'd listen to them if somebody, if the local H&R Block folks in North Dakota wanted to come and talk to me. And I do during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I heard from a lot of tax preparers, but mostly they were concerned about certain things in the code itself. They weren't worried about losing business per se, because the vast majority of North Dakotans, and I want to say close to 90%, just use a standard deduction, which makes filing your taxes pretty easy. So all of that said, I guess my basic response, without hearing another argument, is that collecting taxes is a government function, and they ought to facilitate it in as easy and low cost manner as possible to the citizens that who've already earned the right to have their taxes taken away from them. So it's not as simple as maybe the government competing in other areas of business, whether it's, water pipelines, which is one of the more famous ones in North Dakota that I've been involved in over my history, things like that, that I think are naturally the private sectors to do. But tax policy or tax collection is not traditionally the private sector.
If the IRS can make it easier for me to interact so that I don't need H&R Block, I have a hard time feeling sorry about H&R Block. I don't want to purposely hurt any business, but if we can make it so I don't need them,
that's right. Amen.
Creative destruction of the free market. And Kevin, that's all the questions we have this week. Appreciated as always.
That's a bunch of them. No, it's good. Thanks, Rob. Talk to you next week.
That's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. Remember, new episodes come out Monday through Friday. We should be available if you're listening to this through a web browser, and a lot of you do. I'm actually surprised by how many people, just when I put the audio up on Say Anything blog, or it's on the news sites, Fargo Forum, Grand Forks Herald, just listen that way. It's also available on all sorts of podcasting platforms, so Spotify, Pocket Casts, Stitcher, download some. If you're not familiar with podcasting, boy, are you missing out. Download some of these apps. It's a great way. It works on your smartphone. It's super, super easy. If you have any trouble, email me, rob@sayanythingblog.com. And by the way, if one of those platforms allows you to rate or review the podcast, if you would leave an honest rating and review, I would sure appreciate it. You can also use my email address, rob@sayanythingblog.com. If you have any questions for our weekly guest, Senator Kevin Cramer, Congressman Kelly Armstrong, you can send the questions there. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook, but also the Say Anything blog accounts. I'm super easy to find. Just search for me. My name's pretty unique. I'm not hard to find. If you follow me on there, say hi, because I like it when people say hi. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.